My mother works in an office and I've been hearing stories like this since childhood. This isn't just fun for the sake of use, it's about real experiences, where one sentence in a letter changed everything. The goal is for you to recognize yourself and not make the same mistakes. All names and titles in the story are of course fictional and have been changed.
The warning pinged at 6:07 p.m. on a Thursday. I was still in the office, finishing out the weekly sprint summary when my monitoring script lit up like a Christmas tree. Unauthorized download attempt. Root level folder. Someone had tried to clone the entire project directory, research, ops history, financial roadmaps, everything, straight off the cloud backbone I'd built. I stood up so fast my chair nearly tipped backward. The folder they touched wasn't just a workspace. It was the operational nervous system of 4 departments, and it didn't belong to Archewell Dynamics. It belonged to me. I checked the logs. User ID Maddox.aid timestamped, flagged. And for the first time in years, I felt that cold bloom of instinct in the base of my spine. Someone was poking around who didn't know what they were touching. Before we go further, if you've ever worked hard to build something invisible but essential and watched someone try to hijack it without even understanding the architecture, hit that like button and subscribe. It helps more than you know and keeps stories like this coming from the team. All right. Back to the mess. I didn't panic. Just screenshotted the logs, sent a brief professional, "Hey, just a heads up, this triggered a flag on my end" email to Griffin Maddox, our shiny new VP of operations, and moved on. I didn't expect a thank you. I didn't expect anything, really. But I definitely didn't expect silence. Griffin had only been with the company 3 weeks, and he walked in like he was the second coming of lean strategy. Classic PowerPoint guy. Expensive watch. Fast words, no historical context. He talked in abstractions. Drive down vertical costs. Rationalize the cloud interface. Translation: cut people, blame legacy systems, act surprised when it breaks. I'd seen the type before. They came in loud and left quietly, usually just after the 4th system failure they couldn't explain. What Griffin didn't know was that 5 years ago, when Archewell couldn't afford a secure internal infrastructure, they outsourced it to me. Northbridge Analytics LLC, my company, my servers, my architecture, and most importantly, my contract. A master services agreement signed under a former CTO who actually read things before he signed them. The MSA gave my LLC custodianship of Archewell's operational data, with exclusive rights to maintain, gatekeep, and secure the shared environment. It wasn't a favor. It was a strategic decision during a resource crisis, and it kept the company running for years. Every Thursday, I ran a sync with product and finance. Quiet, efficient, boring to anyone who didn't understand how vital it was. No one from Griffin's side ever joined, until now, until his assistant tried to copy the entire structure into a local directory like it was a recipe off Pinterest. I stared at the access log again, then checked something else. A few lines down, another alert. An attempted folder rename, Strategic Ops 2024 Backup GM. He wasn't just browsing, he was trying to rebrand the damn thing. I didn't write back. Not yet. I checked the time. 6:14 p.m. I opened a new tab, archived a fresh copy of the week's audit trail, and exported a clean copy of the root folder usage history. Then I closed my laptop and walked out of the office. Griffin had no idea what he'd just done. That folder was more than a sync tool. It was a permissioned vault tied to infrastructure escrow, compliance logs, automated backups, and 2 separate redundancy mirrors across secured vendor servers. You don't copy-paste that kind of system. You don't rename it. You don't even breathe too close to it without clearance. And the worst part? I knew he thought he was being clever. Getting ahead. Cleaning house. It wasn't going to end well for him. The email came in at 8:22 a.m. Subject line: action required. I clicked it without thinking, expecting another half-baked KPI update or Griffin's latest alignment framework. Instead, I saw 12 words that would detonate the next month of his life. Send me the password to the shared drive and clean out your desk. No salutation, no context, just a direct order from a man who thought he was God with a Gmail signature. I stared at the screen, blinked once, and read it again. He really thought he had the authority to shut me down like a forgotten Slack channel. No HR, no meeting, not even a courtesy call. Just exile by email. That's when it hit me. He had no idea who I was. Not really. He saw a name attached to a drive, probably skimmed some org chart dated before his tenure, and assumed I was another overpaid tech consultant squatting on legacy permissions. Someone he could sweep out with a single keystroke and a smug, streamline memo. He didn't know about the contract, the infrastructure, the clause. Oh, Griffin. 5 years ago, Arkwell Dynamics was still clawing its way out of a failed product launch. Their internal systems were a mess. Siloed drives, expired licenses, regulatory exposure just waiting to explode. I came in through a side door, contract vendor, clean systems, low visibility. My LLC, Northbridge Analytics, offered them a way to run without rebuilding. We negotiated hard. Very hard. And in the final version of the Master Services Agreement, right there in the technical custodianship section, sat the clause that would save me. Vendor retains exclusive administrative control of hosted infrastructure and associated assets unless revoked via board resolution, with 30-day transfer protocol under supervision of Arkwell Legal. I highlighted the line, copied the contract reference, and dropped it into a reply. No password. That drive operates under my company's license and escrow terms. If you have questions, please check with legal. That was it. One line. No emotion, no flinch. I BCC'd Arkwell's legal department, attached a PDF of the signed clause, and hit send. Griffin probably thought I was bluffing. Thought I'd come crawling back when my badge didn't scan or my company calendar evaporated. What he didn't know, what no one on his side seemed to bother checking, was that Arkwell's operational backbone ran on my cloud licenses, maintained by my firm on servers I paid for, monitored with tools I built. And the second he sent that email, he did more than insult me. He triggered a clause. Because I'd anticipated this. Years back, when I saw how fast execs rotated through that place, how eager they were to consolidate vendors and in-house key functions, I'd baked in something special. A self-termination clause. If Arkwell unilaterally attempted to terminate services without board ratification, all SLAs dissolved. Instantly. No notice, no warnings. The system would still function, sure, but updates, logs, backups, dead, and support, gone. The moment he told me to clean out my desk, he severed their access to the one person who actually understood how everything held together. I opened my admin dashboard. Watched the sync heartbeat flicker yellow. The countdown had started. The thread lit up fast. At 8:27 a.m., Griffin forwarded my reply to legal. The subject line was a masterpiece of corporate arrogance. Please handle. He thought he was pawning off an inconvenience, a loose end. Maybe even expecting someone from legal to strong-arm me into handing over the password like I was guarding the Wi-Fi at a Starbucks. At 8:39, legal forwarded the entire thing to the CEO with a single brutal sentence. You just fired your vendor. I didn't even need to see the reply. I could feel the temperature drop from 5 miles away. Meanwhile, I sat perfectly still in my office chair. No panic, no gloating. Just stillness, like watching a glass teeter off the edge of a counter in slow motion. Gravity was always going to do what gravity does. Griffin just helped it along. I opened my audit dashboard and locked in the final snapshot. Auto-tagged, archived, watermarked. Every log from the moment he typed, "You're done here," was now sealed with Northbridge Analytics digital watermark. Unalterable, compliant, legally time-stamped. A record of clean disengagement. The self-termination clause had been waiting quietly in the shadows of the MSA for 5 years. Never invoked, never needed, until now. Clause 11C. It was simple. If Arkwell attempted to sever contracted vendor services without documented board resolution, and without the 30-day transition process, the vendor, me, was released from all service-level obligations effective immediately. Not after a meeting, not after a call. Immediately. They wanted to pretend they owned the infrastructure? Fine. Let them try running it. I logged into the admin portal, exported all current access logs to a secure escrow archive, and then flipped the environment into custody mode. All user activity frozen. No writes, no edits, no cloning, no transfers. Just clean, read-only shadows of the systems they thought they controlled. They could still see the dashboards. They just couldn't change a damn thing. And from that moment forward, Every automated backup, every sync, every file, every dashboard was stamped with a new footer. Archived under Northbridge Analytics LLC, custody mode initiated. Let them forward that to the board. Griffin probably didn't even know what an SLA was. He sure didn't know he just blew his company's last mile support bridge into a smoking crater. I didn't need revenge. I had compliance, and that was louder than any threat I could have typed. By 9:00 a.m., the portal was closed on my end. By 9:02, the sync heartbeat on their dashboards stopped blinking. And by 9:05, Griffin finally replied to legal's email. All it said was, "Wait, what?" Friday morning hit like a brick wall wrapped in broken Post-its. The kind that pile up after every missed sync, every forgotten action item, every half-finished pivot that only ever lived in someone's Notion wish list. I wasn't there to see it in person, but my inbox, still quietly forwarding to a filtered archive, painted the picture loud and clear. First came the product team. Is the roadmap file down for maintenance? Then finance. Can someone check the linkage for the Q4 projections? All cells are returning R to ref. Then marketing, desperate. Hey, our social metrics dashboard won't load. It says the source folder is missing? That's what happens when your infrastructure isn't a tool. It's a person, and that person leaves. They pinged it pinged me. I ignored it. I was no longer under contract. By 1:17 p.m., the Slack panic had gone from confused to unhinged. Threads with 50 comments, people tagging folks who hadn't worked at Arkwell in 2 years. Someone even pinged a Google Drive from a totally different company, hoping the files had magically migrated there. They hadn't. By 3:45, the head of customer ops posted, "If anyone finds the vendor SOPs for onboarding, please share. We have 5 clients in onboarding limbo." And by 4:12, someone finally said it out loud. "We don't have access at all." That's when the irony really landed. It wasn't data loss. Nothing was gone. Every file still existed, intact, time-stamped, escrowed, secured. They just didn't have custody. Arkwell Dynamics was like a tenant trying to throw out the landlord, then wondering why the locks changed. My environment was still online, mirrored, monitored, and humming along quietly inside Northbridge's custody protocol. What they were locked out of wasn't a server. It was a legal structure, a boundary, a wall made out of every oversight they never thought to review. The systems were built to be resilient, but resilient doesn't mean public. They were dependent on credentials they didn't own, licenses they never purchased, and maintenance they didn't even realize had been quietly happening every week while they scrambled through their optimization meetings. The junior PM, bless him, was the first to say the quiet part out loud. He posted in a general Slack thread, probably thinking no one would notice. Why does the dashboard now say property of Northbridge Analytics LLC? Is that normal? 2 minutes later, that message was deleted, but not before it got screenshotted. By 5, 4 departments were frozen out of files they didn't even know they were using. Like trying to cook dinner and realizing the stove belongs to someone else, and they just took the knobs with them. Nobody knew how to explain it. Griffin sure didn't. And I just sipped my tea and archived the time-stamped log from the first failed sync attempt. No revenge, no drama, just gravity, again, doing its job. Monday's all hands kicked off like any corporate triage session. Vague agenda, tense faces, and the stench of someone trying to pretend the ship wasn't sinking. Griffin started with a clicker and a cheap grin. "Let's talk about what's changing this quarter," he said, like this was a routine sync and not a 5-alarm fire. Behind him, the first slide read, Strategic Infrastructure Realignment, Phase 1. No one in the room blinked. No one smiled. They'd spent the last 3 business days unable to access the tools they needed to do their jobs. Teams were working out of screenshots, forwarded PDFs, and sheer caffeine panic. Clients were asking why onboarding had stalled. Vendors were requesting paperwork that no one could find. Half of finance had already submitted support tickets to nowhere. But Griffin? He kept talking. We anticipated some friction. This is all part of a planned transition as we move to a more centralized, scalable model. "Stop," Legal said. The voice came from the back corner, dry, precise, cold. He froze mid-sentence. "Sorry?" "You didn't read the termination clause," Legal repeated, louder now, standing. "You severed vendor rights without board clearance." A pause. We've lost operational custody. The room stilled. It wasn't just about files anymore. It was about control. Legally, technically, financially. Everything they assumed was owned wasn't. Griffin squinted. No, we can just reset passwords. Bring in IT. It's a shared drive. Legal shook her head once. Then she clicked her own laptop, and the screen behind Griffin changed. It wasn't a chart. It was my final invoice. Plain text. Issued Friday. Paid by automated ACH. Line item at the bottom. Support services suspended per section 11C. Custody protocol initiated. A red stamp across the footer. SLA suspended. Vendor no longer engaged. Griffin turned a shade paler. Where did this come from? He asked. It was forwarded automatically, Legal said, because the vendor anticipated you'd do something reckless. You triggered the clause the moment you emailed that termination without board oversight. He looked like he wanted to argue. Instead, he just muttered, "We still have the data, right? It's not gone." Legal didn't answer right away. Then she opened another window. This one wasn't an invoice. It was a system activity tracker. Clean interface, familiar folder trees. But instead of user edits, the logs were full of red flags. Unauthorized copy attempts, blocked access events, failed rename commands. Dozens of them. All logged, all time-stamped, all archived in real time. Embedded tracker, she said. Vendor protocol. Every attempt to manipulate custody triggers auto-forwarding to legal with full audit trail. Someone toward the front murmured, "Jesus Christ." Another whispered, "She built that in?" "She built all of it," legal said flatly. "Your drive, her infrastructure, her servers, her admin keys, her backup rules, and her triggers. You didn't remove a contractor. You fired a licensed vendor mid-contract with active SLA coverage and escrow obligations." Griffin stood there, silent. Clicker limp in one hand, like maybe if he held it long enough, he could rewind time. Instead, the room did what rooms do when the lie unravels. They shifted. Body language, eye contact, all of it. People leaned toward legal, away from Griffin. And then, with the kind of slow, deliberate malice only corporate policy can deliver, the screen switched one last time. There, across the top of the compliance tracker, in bold gray text, Custody Protocol Active, Northbridge Analytics LLC, authorized until June 2026. That was the moment the air changed. You could feel it, like the building exhaled, finally aware of how deep it was in someone else's architecture. No yelling, no flames, just a clean surgical end to the illusion of control. By noon, the banner went live across every Archewell dashboard like a death certificate. Access suspended. Consult vendor. It wasn't flashy, no red blinking lights, just clean sans serif font on a gray strip across the top of every internal tool. But in a company like Archewell, that banner was the equivalent of someone cutting the brakes and casually placing a post-it on the dash that said, "Good luck." The Northbridge Analytics servers, my servers, cut external access on schedule, not in anger, in execution. Escrow protocol dictated it. Once SLA support was suspended and no board transition had been triggered, all active endpoints shifted to read-only custody mode for 72 hours. After that, total lockout, and today, the clock hit 0. They couldn't edit, couldn't duplicate, couldn't migrate. All they could do was stare at the systems they thought they owned and wonder who let this happen. Griffin didn't take it well. According to someone in finance who still had me on LinkedIn, he stormed into the legal wing like he was going to flip a switch and make the entire policy collapse from sheer willpower. "I want her reinstated," he barked. Legal didn't even look up. "You can't," came the flat reply. "No, I need her reinstated, or someone from her team will pay a rush rate. Just give us access." "You fired the license holder," Legal said again. "Her LLC is not obligated to reinstate anything. In fact, any reinstatement now would require a new MSA, different terms, different rates, and board approval." He blinked, like he heard the words but couldn't process them. "But we still have the data, right? I mean, it's ours. It's ours." Legal finally looked up, slowly. "You have copies of data, yes, but you don't have infrastructure rights. You don't have operational keys. You don't have admin permissions to the tools you use every day. You didn't own any of that. You leased it. Through her." A silence settled in like fog. That's when the CFO, who'd been watching this entire meltdown without saying a word, finally spoke. "Griffin," he said slowly, each word colder than the last. "Did you even know she owned the infrastructure?" Griffin opened his mouth, closed it, swallowed. "No," he admitted. It hit the room like a slap, not just because of what it revealed, but because of what it cost. Arkwell had spent 5 years running on the quiet, invisible scaffolding of a system they never took time to understand. And Griffin, in a rush to trim fat, had sliced through the bone. And I wasn't even in the city. I was 2 states away, checking into a spa retreat I'd booked a year ago and postponed 3 times. The kind of place with no cell service, hot stones, and cucumber water. But the moment the banner went up, I knew. Not because I saw it, because the silence came. A very specific kind of silence. No calls, no emails, no alerts. Just the heavy quiet that settles when a building full of people realizes no one is coming to save them. I'd written every protocol, every termination clause, every step of the custody handover, and now the machine was simply running them without me. That's the difference between having control and being the control. I didn't need to lift a finger. I already had. Years ago. The digging started Monday night. Legal pulled every archived agreement they could find. Contracts, amendments, email chains, board minutes. They were hunting for a loophole, some dusty thread they could tug on to undo what Griffin had done. But the archive didn't lie, and it didn't bend. Every document pointed to the same truth. The infrastructure didn't belong to Arkwell. It was licensed, leased, contractually independent. The crown jewels of the operation were propped up by a legally bound vendor relationship crafted during a desperate fiscal quarter 5 years ago, signed by a CTO who didn't believe in half measures. That CTO, bless him, knew exactly what he was doing. He understood that if you don't want to fund a proper internal build, you better respect the vendor who keeps your systems breathing. So he'd locked it in airtight. Custody rights, access conditions, SLA reversals, escrow activation, even post-termination audit protections. And best of all, transfer of infrastructure control required a majority vote from the board. Not a Slack message, not a forwarded email, not some mid-tier VP with a hero complex and a clicker. Griffin hadn't just stepped out of bounds. He'd sprinted into oncoming traffic wearing a blindfold and dragged the entire company with him. By Wednesday, his assistant was gone. Word around the internal grapevine was that she'd been pushed into initiating the drive copy attempt, under orders, and when it all unraveled, he'd thrown her under the bus in a panic. She walked out with a 1-line exit email. I wasn't hired to take the fall. Thursday, his replacement for vendor systems continuity showed up. An ex-consultant from a mid-size firm with a polished LinkedIn page and zero idea what he was walking into. He logged in, tried to access the admin console, denied, tried again. Escrow token required. He called IT. IT called legal. Legal called me. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. They already knew. Because sitting in the root folder of the old compliance archive, exactly where it had always been, was a PDF labeled Access Governance Transition, Authorization Protocol. It had 2 signature lines. Mine was already signed. The other, labeled Executive Officer, a Board Representative, was blank, not unsigned by accident. Blank by design, because I never activated a transfer. And without both signatures, that protocol was just paper, which meant the system stayed in custody mode. Escrow keys stayed locked. Infrastructure remained under the control of Northbridge Analytics, which meant Griffin's replacement wasn't a replacement at all. Just a well-dressed bystander with a locked laptop and a puzzled expression. The emails started arriving that afternoon. Quick question about escalation paths. Hi, hoping you can clarify a few things. Just wondering if we could schedule a quick reconnect. I didn't respond. Dignity doesn't do do-overs, and I wasn't about to hand over a decade of architecture just to clean up someone else's tantrum. They could read the paperwork like everyone else. Receipts don't argue. They just wait. The CEO's name flashed on my phone at 7:16 p.m. Thursday night. Unlisted number, but I recognized the area code. I was sitting on my balcony with a blanket across my lap and a glass of wine I hadn't even sipped yet. Part of me debated letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity won. I answered without ceremony. "This is Dinah." He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We'd like to offer reinstatement," he said, as if the word "we" still held any power. "You'd be reporting directly to me. No Griffin interference. There's also a retainer, significant one, and a dotted line exec designation if that matters to you." I didn't answer. "We understand this situation got out of hand," he added. Griffin's approach was aggressive. "Aggressive is what you call a sales tactic," I said. "This was reckless." He hesitated, then dropped the real bait. 400,000, Dana, annualized, clean. You'd have full freedom to stabilize the infrastructure and oversee the transition back to internal control. You'd be running point. I exhaled slowly, watching the sun dip behind the trees. "That clause," I said evenly, "wasn't a trap. It was a boundary. You just never expected to hit it." Silence. He waited. I let him. When he spoke again, it was quieter. "We need this resolved. If not by you, then someone you trust. Someone who won't burn the place down." "I already gave you what you need," I said. "Northbridge Analytics LLC remains the license owner. I'll appoint a systems custodian from my team, someone trained, thorough, and calm. She'll hold the tokens, quarterly refresh, escrow certified, and she'll report directly to the board for compliance sign-offs. Not to Griffin, not to anyone under him." He didn't argue. He knew better. "I assume that means you're declining," he said finally. "I'm declining the chaos," I replied, "not the clarity." What I didn't say was this: I was never coming back, not to babysit someone else's mess, not to watch another PowerPoint puppet wave his MBA in my face while pretending to architect systems he couldn't spell. I built the bones of that company. They forgot that because it was quiet, because it didn't wear a suit or speak in investor buzzwords, because it didn't shout when people took credit. It just ran, perfectly, silently, until they broke it. Now they'd rebuild, on my terms, or not at all. Griffin? His streamlined ops vision got quietly shelved in the next board review. Word was the chair muttered something about rushing change without reading the foundation. Infrastructure changes were frozen pending independent vendor review, my vendor review, and as for the protege I assigned, she was better than I ever was at that age. Patient, methodical, hard to rattle. The systems didn't need me anymore. They needed the boundary I created and someone calm enough to keep it intact. Weeks passed. The storm quieted, not because the chaos was solved, but because people adjusted to it. Departments rewired their workflows around access tickets. Griffin faded into the background, a PowerPoint shell with no real control. And the systems? They came back online, one by one, slowly, deliberately. No big announcement, no company-wide memo, just dashboards blinking green again, syncs humming quietly, spreadsheets populating like nothing ever happened. But everything had changed. Every access point now required escrow-verified tokens. No more soft passwords, no backdoors, no workarounds. Admin rights required quarterly confirmation and board-level sign-off. Even opening a file triggered a passive audit trail. The infrastructure was alive, but watched. And there, stamped into the footer of every single login screen, bold and unmissable, infrastructure and data custodianship by Northbridge Analytics LLC, licensed through 2026. No internal override permitted without board ratification. It didn't scream. It didn't warn. It just existed, like steel under paint. At an industry panel 2 months later, the CEO gave a keynote on vendor trust in post-startup scalability. I watched the live stream from my home office, coffee in hand, cat curled up at my feet. He wore his usual suit, sounded polished, rehearsed. Someone asked a question about operational transparency. He cleared his throat and said, "We had a learning experience. We assumed we could shift infrastructure without fully understanding its origin. Turned out, what we called a shared drive was actually a licensed environment with legal boundaries baked into the code. We learned to respect those boundaries. It was expensive, but necessary." He paused, then added, almost like a confession, "Sometimes the people who make the least noise are the ones holding the keys." The room nodded. Someone clapped. I didn't need to. I hadn't built those systems to make noise. I'd built them to work. to last. And when they were violated, I didn't retaliate. I just enforced the boundary that was always there, quietly, calmly, completely. That's what ownership is. Not volume, not posture. It's permanence. It's the lock you never notice until someone tries to force the door. And when they do, you don't yell. You let the door stay closed. Control isn't loud, it's silent until someone tries to take it.